The papers report 3/4 of Israelis want to be in the European Union, and 1/10 of Israelis would actually leave Israel for Europe if they were granted EU citizenship. So if it's true there's a new Hitlerite anti-Semitism in Europe, this must mean that 1/4 of Israelis want Israel to ally with Nazis. And 1 in every 10 Israelis wants to be exterminated. Does that sound credible? Well, what's the purpose of all this? Now we get back to the title of the lecture and I end. What's the purpose of all this? It's pretty obvious. The purpose is, number 1, to turn the perpetrator, Israel and its supporters, into the victim, focusing on the alleged suffering of Jews rather than the very real suffering of Palestinians. And the second purpose is to discredit all criticism of Israel as being motivated by anti-Semitism. And we all had an opportunity to watch this fake controversy at work before our eyes. Last year, Jimmy Carter publishes the book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. The book comes out. The first thing, Kenneth Stein from Emory University says, Carter is a plagiarist. Then, Alan Dershowitz says, Carter is in the pay of Arab sheikhs. Then Jimmy Carter is accused of being an anti-Semite. Then Deborah Lipstadt writes in the Washington Post, he's a borderline Holocaust denier. Then Neil Scher writes that he's a Nazi sympathizer. Then we're told he was a supporter of Arab terrorism. And all worked like a charm. Go back and look at the reviews of the book. You'll see. We never discussed the content of the book. It wasn't a great book. The parts of it were not bad. Chapter 16, The Wall as a Prison, in which he describes how the wall that Israel is building is destroying the city of Bethlehem. Not bad. Find one reference, one, in the hundreds of reviews of the book, find one reference to chapter 16. No, we're not going to discuss the documentary record. We're not going to discuss the facts. We're not even going to discuss the Israel-Palestine conflict. We're going to discuss, is Jimmy Carter a plagiarist, in the pay of Arab sheikhs, an anti-Semite, a Holocaust denier, a Nazi sympathizer, a supporter of Arab terrorism? That's what we're going to discuss. And that's exactly how it works here. Divert attention from, sow confusion about what the actual documentary record shows. Is that cause for despair? Is that cause for hopelessness? Not at all. I'm more optimistic than ever. I'm more convinced than ever that we can win, that we can prevail. All we have to do is learn a little from President Carter. Number 1, stick to the facts. Don't exaggerate. Don't misrepresent. Just stick to the facts. The facts are the most powerful weapon we have. When Jimmy Carter goes to Gaza, he doesn't have to exaggerate. He speaks exactly the truth. He says what's happening in Gaza is an atrocity. That's the fact. Number 1, stick to the facts. And number 2, show a little courage. Show a little backbone. This is the United States. We do not, apart from a targeted group, and I don't want to in any way diminish the problems they face. For example, Dr. Sami El-Arian, who did show courage and paid a huge price. But most of us, the price we have to pay is so trivial. It's so minimal. We have a relatively free society. Show some courage. Show some backbone. Stick to the facts. But once you're at the facts, don't retreat. As Paul Robeson used to say, don't retreat 1,000 parts of 1 inch. And that's what Mr. Carter did. And he didn't make out badly. #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, sold 300,000 copies in hardback. He said, I want to be in the lion's den. Take me to Brandeis University, the oldest, the most distinguished secular Jewish university in the U.S. He went, 2,000 students showed up in the gym, overwhelmingly Jewish. Mr. Carter came. He already had the reputation that preceded him, the anti-Semite, Holocaust denier, and the rest. He got 4 standing ovations at Brandeis. And then when Professor Dershowitz replied, the newspapers report when he went up to speak, about 2/3 of the audience walked out before he opened his mouth. And that's a lesson to all of us. We have 2 very powerful weapons. We have that weapon of truth, and we have that weapon of justice. We have the facts on our side. We have the human rights organizations on our side. We have the General Assembly on our side. We have the World Court on our side. If we learn how to use those weapons, wield those weapons of truth or justice, then however much power they have a lot of power. And however much money they have a lot of money. And however ruthless they are ruthless. I'm absolutely confident, more confident than ever, that we can win. I want to just clarify one thing on that point. When I say win, I do not mean trying to vanquish anyone. There is a line that the late Edward Said used to like to quote, and he was quoting Aimé Césaire. There's a place for everyone at the rendezvous with victory. I am not out, or we should not be out, to vanquish or destroy. All we're asking is that everyone has the same right to human dignity, the same right to a decent life, the same right to a fair craft at life's happiness. That's what we're after. And I think with that message, we can reach the overwhelming majority of the American people. We can finally, hopefully, all one day be able to see the day when Israel packs up its bags, leaves the occupied territories, and we'll all be able to say that we were part of that day when finally the Palestinians were, to use the old line, free at last, free at last. Thank God they're free at last. Thank you. Many notes about time's up, and I know he was getting very exasperated. I worked on it someplace. The audience was absolutely respectful, for which I thank you. And what I'd like to do now is to give the floor first to dissenters, those who listen patiently, listen respectfully, perhaps listen even though it was painful to listen. I want to let the dissenters go first. So if you have a dissenting statement or question, you should be allowed to go first. So dissenters? Wait. First dissenters. And I not seeing someone because sometimes I miss a person. If you're a dissenter and you'd like to ask a question or make a statement, then just stand up. Okay. Am I correct that there is no one? Okay, thank you.
Do you think